IEEE member or guest, and you can use the chat box to ask questions, and the speaker will answer later. So this is our group in Austin. I'm the chair, and those are the few people you saw before. And that's our goal for the year. So we'd like to, well, let me kind of simplify that. Okay. Our interest in 5G, 6G, IoT, AI, smart city, and you can also be our speaker. We'd like to hear more about finance, hobby, travel, education. We want to hear your story and your contribution in the past, health and aging, and history on intelligent engineering and science achievements. So our next 3 meetings, June 22nd, we're going to talk about IIoT. And also next one, July, we talk about a new device to help the autism kids. And Doug was a speaker on quantum computing before. Then the next in August will be FAE, field application, and then you talk about his semiconductor stories. Tonight, our speaker is Alex Porter. She's the CEO of ModTech Labs. She's going to talk about her a little bit more, but probably you saw the introduction in the flyer. So a lot of action going on, so into a lot of new technologies. And tonight, she may talk about that a little bit later. Tonight, emphasis on how to make a faster 3D ecosystem with her product. So maybe let's get her on board, and I stop sharing.
We are here to talk about the future of 3D. The way that we like to look at it at Mod, and my own personal sort of purview on this, that it's really the human experience amplified. It's all about bringing the sort of comfort and understanding that we have of our 3D world into virtual worlds. My background is actually interior design and construction technology, so the visualization of places and spaces. That is my degree. I studied all kinds of construction tech, including AutoCAD, Revit, really the underlying software in that industry. And then I have over 7 years in emerging tech, running 2 different startups. My current one, ModTech Labs, and my previous, which was an XR studio. We ran for 5 years. My CTO and I have run both companies together. And our focus in that company was actually to build augmented and virtual reality tools for large corporations. And so we did everything from face swap for main actors and stunt doubles into actually creating a VR driving simulation for motorized wheelchairs for the 2nd largest wheelchair manufacturer in the world, and a ton of other interesting things in between, data visualization for KPMG. And this current company is a venture-backed startup, and we have been recognized, both myself and my CTO, in the Intel Top Innovator Program since 2015, NVIDIA Inception, and by the city of Austin as well. I know not everyone is in this space, but we won an award in 2019, and several other awards, really recognizing sort of the fast-paced movement and the opportunity that we're creating in this space. So I want to talk a little bit about the hype, right? If you read the paragraph that I wrote, you probably recognized a lot of hype words. Almost everything on here came from that paragraph, except for metaverse, because it didn't actually say it in that. Or actually, it did say it. It's on there twice. That's how great it is. The reality is, metaverse is kind of controversial. People are like, I don't know what to make of this. Are we now going to be living in virtual world and not even experiencing our day-to-day life? I don't view it like that. I view the metaverse as an opportunity to engage with other people on any screen, whether the screen is on your face in your headset, whether it's on your phone in your hand, whether it's on a screen and you're watching a film. That to me is metaverse. You throw in Web3. Web3 is definitely, the core and the pinning of bringing in blockchain, bringing in crypto, bringing in a massive amount of opportunity to actually do decentralized finance along with these experiences, automate these processes. So this is a really fun thing, right? To think about all of the fun hype words that are being used more and more regularly now. We actually battled with trying to describe our company because we're like, no one knows what immersive is. Not really. Like out there in the world, if you say we do immersive media, it's a big question mark for a lot of people. So there's a great opportunity for us to say this now. Metaverse, in my mind, is a bucketing mechanism. So it's a bucket of technology that creates all of this opportunity. And technology, of course, smart contracts, and crypto, XR, AI, MR, right? I call this alphabet soup. And back in the day, I would tell people I work in AR, VR, MR, XR, and they were just like, what? What does that even mean? It's altered reality, right? Digital reality. And obviously they all have their distinct differences, but the function of bringing these things together and creating the opportunity for those buzzword interactions in the metaverse on Web3, that's where we sit. We focus on the 3D content itself in our work. So the evolution of human creativity is really the underpinning of these virtual worlds, these virtual experiences. So if you think about Disney actually used a castle in Germany as his inspiration for the Cinderella castle. So we brought it into the fantasy world. We all, enjoyed this movie. Maybe we didn't all enjoy this movie, but we all have watched this movie probably. And ultimately, he brought this into the real world as an experience, as something that we could go to, stand in, and really, evolve that human experience beyond fantasy and past reality. And that, to me, is really the core of the metaverse. What it really means, though, to get to that point where the metaverse is a real thing, right? Right now, the metaverse is very intangible. It is really a bucket of technology that isn't all that connected yet. There are a few things that these virtual worlds require. They require high quality visuals, small files, easy universal access, double feedback. What this means is access, right? You have to be able to create this content at scale. You have to be able to enjoy the content. There's a lot of people that haven't loved the, virtual reality experience because the visuals are really challenging to get very high quality on those tiny screens with all the optical, science behind it. Like there's a massive amount of things that have to go into that in order to overcome the uncanny valley, in order to overcome, the individual human body, right? We're all built differently. Our eyes are actually spaced differently, among many other things. And small files, right? We all know that in order to move data of any kind, it needs to be portable. Right now, 3D files are not small. They are very large. They're cumbersome to actually transfer. They do not work on multiple platforms. When you output a 3D file, it works for the platform you output it for, not for everything you ever want to bring it in. So an example of this is a 3D avatar that you've created that you would like to bring into Sandbox and Roblox and Fortnite. Can you do that? No, you cannot do that. There are people working on that particular problem, the avatar problem, but there's a lot of other 3D assets that we own in this digital economy that we want to bring with us to every world. But 3D creation is hard and it's expensive. And I've, alluded to this a bit, but we are on the photorealism side. So we focused on photo, video, and scan data specifically. So this is, we're not, the models is the other piece of this puzzle. We are focused in this realism space. So in order to create 3D assets from this type of data, you have over 25 steps in a workflow. That is an immense amount of time, energy, and effort to transfer between different file types and programs and people. This takes up to 6 days for each 3D file, and this is done with over 13 highly skilled artists at a minimum on a 3D team. So these people are really individually skilled in separate software programs, separate optimization techniques, and they're having to work together to function to make these assets. This is not scalable, right? In order for us to build this greater vision of virtual worlds, we need to be able to make 3D content at scale. So this includes everything from objects to environments to people, right? We want to bring all of those things with us. right now, it's really important to think about this and create opportunity to build the foundation right, because it's being built in silos. A lot of these companies are currently building their own version of a metaverse or an omniverse or a DeFi game or what have you. They're not interconnecting at all. Currently, they're completely separate. You can go into, a Snapchat world and play with their stuff. You can go into a meta world and play with their stuff. They don't play together at all. And that is a huge problem for the end user. And you can actually, if you're following what's happening in Europe with the Digital Media Act, this is actually a piece of that puzzle, kind of opening up that field and making interoperability a fundamental for huge companies. So this interesting piece of data came from CTA, actually, Consumer Technology Association. They have a landscape and approach sort of way that they're looking and building out these sections of tactics for companies, right? So the hardware first approach is definitely, your Samsung, your Microsoft, your Apple, your Meta. They all have headsets. NVIDIA, of course, has chips, right? So we're processors. So we're creating an opportunity there for them to be the sort of infrastructure level, the playback level. And then you have game engines and software-based approach, where they're really digging in on how they engage the user, how they create opportunity in this software side. And then ultimately the crypto-based approach, where it is, play to earn. It's also a lot about that digital economy piece. And I think it's really fundamental to have an understanding of the landscape and how it's being broken down now, because again, none of these interconnect, not even within their own silos do they connect. And so we have to be thinking about that. The 3D traditional and new media use cases, right? So 3D is interesting, but not everyone really understands what 3D is. And that's totally fine. There's a lot of different interpretations of 3D sort of as a definition, if you will. We're talking about true 3D digital content that you can view from any angle. You could reshoot, you can resize, you can do a lot more with it. But what do you do with it? Interactive content, virtual training, AR commerce, holograms, games, movies, NFTs, user-generated content, right? There's a massive swath of things that are falling sometimes into the marketing bucket and sometimes into the gamified sort of playing bucket. And so there's a really cool dichotomy happening where people are trying to figure out where these things sit in the world for their business. And then how do they access users? How do they engage their audience in actually creating the content at scale? Because even Meta, who has, gone on a hiring pause as of their last quarter being not the best, they don't even have enough people to actually create the content that they need to build these worlds. So some other, use cases visually, right? We're talking augmented reality shoe try on, virtual concerts like Justin Bieber, 360 view and augmented reality view for your furniture in your room. Amazon has this on most of their products now. Digital twins for manufacturing cars or buildings in some cases. Games, actors that have been created into characters in the games. And then we also see this, of course, in architecture, construction, and the like. And so we're all around 3D every day, even if we don't know it. And I will tell you, some of the 3D is so good that I can't even identify what is real and what is not real at times. It's very interesting. So I want to dive into a deeper use case. So this is actually a client of ours, ABC Universal. They are interested in working with us at scale to do a few things. So digital twins, in this case, we're talking digital doubles of their stage facilities. So capturing their entire stage facility inside so that they can actually use that for space planning as they do installations of equipment for virtual production, primarily at this point, but other things, right? That's really relevant when you're trying to rent out your stage facilities. People want to understand what it looks like inside so that they can scope it for their set pieces, etc. So this is a really interesting and fun use case. Archival. So if you think about all these cool props that they have sitting on a shelf somewhere, some of them are taken care of very dearly, and some of them are not. Ultimately, you know, they're all going to deteriorate unless they're preserved really, really, you know, high level. And so there's a lot of opportunity here to capture things like Brendan Fraser's hat from The Mummy or Thor's hammer from the movie, right? You capture these physical props that have been used, and then you have digital versions of them that you can actually not only reuse in different productions, you can also use them for second screen experiences like your VR game, your mobile game, your augmented reality game, right? There's a ton of other cool, fun things that you can do with it. And there's a massive opportunity for creating licensing using the blockchain. So using smart contracts to actually license out these assets and perhaps sell them to gaming companies. And really you jump over that whole legal fee structure around licensing when you enable a blockchain licensing opportunity. So you can see some examples here. The totem pole is actually a piece in the Victoria Museum in Victoria, British Columbia. The second is my CTO in volumetric video. That was actually a fun experiment that we did with webcams to create full volumetric video. And then lastly, we have a shoe, just kind of indicative of, you know, a generic prop that you might use or have. And ultimately, you know, virtual production, just to give you a little insight into that piece, is really important as far as the adoption and expansion of 3D content. So virtual production, if you're not familiar yet, it's really just the combination of digital and physical in a much higher scale than before to create films. So typically they have a background that is LED screens. On those LED screens, you will have your Grand Canyon visuals. What's different, really different about it, is that the director can dynamically change the time of day, the location of which the camera is, or the scene is angled, so he can move the scene, right? So if he's like, oh, that Grand Canyon edge doesn't work for me, I can switch it to the other one live during production.
Any pictures at all? I'm just thinking on a screen.
And they would fix it in post. Ultimately, that gets really challenging because that's very costly. Then you get into reshoots because that rim of the canyon wasn't the right place to do it. So what's happening in the film industry right now is they have actually gone from about 30% digital content to about 80% digital content, which is really awesome and really exciting for this push. And over the last 2 years, virtual production also has the benefit of requiring fewer crew members on set. So the health concerns have been minimized to some extent in regard to live production. And the resources in general are just less. It's actually saves a massive amount of money as well. So there's a massive push in the entire industry toward this and toward outfitting every stage as a virtual production stage. And I just wanted to briefly touch on some other market opportunities because 3D is in every industry. All of these, right, are relatively focused on sort of creative games, movies, entertainment and media, right? But there's also opportunity in oil and gas, there's opportunity across healthcare, and on and on. And we've worked with some clients in those sectors as well. And the use is sort of varied, right? In one case, we have an oil and gas customer that actually uses us to scan on site to check the geological efficacy of where they're trying to drill. So they use our scanner, they use our processing, they hand that off to a geologist to okay it, and they're using that as part of their process along the line. So it's an interesting and wide world for 3D, but we're a little more focused in the entertainment sector at this juncture. And just the benefits of creator tools being accessible, right? You can upskill someone who's a photographer can learn photogrammetry. It is mathematics and photography pushed together. And then there's, you know, solutions out there to process. You don't have to necessarily understand how to do that. That's one place we sit. This also creates opportunity for generational wealth. So not only are you upskilling yourself, you're also creating an opportunity for selling digital assets, getting recurring royalties. There's a whole interesting structure of DeFi, blockchain, and enablement that happens across that arena. And then of course you're increasing creativity when you can do user-generated content, when you can allow your everyday person to do something that was only reserved for highly skilled people 5 minutes ago. Let's think about website creation, for instance. How many cool, weird websites have we seen that have been done because someone learned WordPress, right? WordPress enabled a whole generation of people to get involved in website creation. And that's what we love about what's happening in this world. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the photogrammetry, scanning, and volumetric video landscape. And so photogrammetry specifically is a still object, person, or place where you are taking a camera or multiple cameras and capturing one image from a rig from every camera, or many images from a single camera around the object of interest. So you take those images, and for a small object, our system actually uses about 145 images. So for a large subject, you would use a lot more. For an environment, we're talking, 800 to 1500, depending on the size of the environment. It could go up from there. So photogrammetry is still photos. You combine them together digitally to make a 3D asset. Scanning is actually using things like drones. You can do a combination of LiDAR, or photogrammetry. You can also use other techniques. You can use video and break it into frames. Scanning is more of a sort of continuous process rather than individual images. And so there's a wide variety of use cases there, especially when you're looking for accuracy. Scanning tends to be a more effective tool. And volumetric video, which is still very new in the world. The typical sort of way that volumetric video is captured these days is you go to a dedicated studio, they have a static camera array, and they have their own in-house processing that they do. You are capturing a moving person, place, or object, right? And then creating a digital twin of that. So it's a recorded performance, and it's an on-demand playback, meaning we don't focus on real-time playback of the immediate thing. We just don't think the fidelity is there for that visually yet, but there are some companies out there that are working on that problem. And then really just kind of break it down. You can transform any kinds of images into 3D. So objects, props, products, worlds, backgrounds, buildings, and people, performance, and animation. The animation piece, I'll elaborate on that just a little bit. Volumetric video, one of the biggest benefits to it is actually capturing the human face. So the human face has millions of points, micro movements of flushing and creasing and all kinds of things that is really hard to duplicate, which is why we get creeped out by human-like things. Like think about robots, right? We know they're not quite right. We know they're not quite human. And so volumetric video actually has millions of points of reference versus facial motion capture. So facial motion capture has 150 or so image actual points of reference. Volumetric video will capture millions of points of reference. And I'll have another image later that will elaborate on that a bit more. So photogrammetry, I'm going into this loosely in this presentation, but I do have a slide that has reference to where you can download more information if you're looking for capture solutions or capture, information. We have some guides for this. So photogrammetry rig coverage really depends on what your subject is. If you're capturing something on a surface, you want to use a dome. If you're capturing something that is actually upright, you want to use a cylinder. And then if you're capturing something that you want the bottom on, which I don't have on here, you want a sphere. And the goal is to have an overlap in the images and lots of points of interest. So you don't want to do, a green screen or a white box. You want to have something of interest behind it so it can actually map all of those things together. It's like a puzzle and that the computer has to figure out, right? So the rig setup itself, again, needs to have overlap in the images. And you can do this with a single camera. It just takes more time, of course, than capturing all of the images simultaneously. It also depends on what your subject is and where it is, whether that makes sense or not. So scanning, again, as I mentioned, it's sort of a continuous capture. And so with this, you really just use a tripod, use something to stabilize it, and you don't have to really do too much tweaking because you're likely using a tool that has this use case in mind already versus a camera, where a camera you can do lots of different types of photography, including photogrammetry. And then volumetric video, again, it's a multi-camera array. You cannot do this. There are some people doing volumetric video with a single camera. Again, it depends on your use case. For us and our clients, it's just not high enough quality yet visually. But that being said, volumetric video camera arrays, our largest camera array that we built was actually 104 cameras with 26 small board computers and several other large things. You're looking at up to a terabyte of data for a minute of video. So it's a lot of data. There's a reason that it's not widely used yet. That is redundant. A use case for volumetric capture. So this is actually a studio here in Austin that does a lot of special effects, facial effects, and physical VFX, meaning they put on makeup to the actors. They've done it for The Walking Dead and many other shows locally filmed. This particular use case was actually us coming in saying, hey, we would really love to experiment with it. You know, can you bring some actors and show us some face painting and see what we can come up with? And the biker chick at the bottom is the same biker chick at the top. We cut her hair because hair just doesn't come out effectively, unfortunately, yet. We're working on that. But really, it's about the mobility of the rig. You can see it's on tripods. We actually brought this entire setup with us in like a rolling suitcase in the back of a Honda Civic. And so the ability to actually functionally capture volumetric video with as few, I believe this rig was about 26 cameras, allowed us to really showcase, you know, a way to make it more consumable. And these were Logitech webcams. So off-the-shelf webcams, they were not depth sensing cameras. We solved for the depth with our software. So general best practices, I'm definitely not gonna read this, but there's a lot of things not to do, things not to do essentially. And again, I can provide you guys more info on this, but it's all about like making sure you have the right background, the right, you know, subject, camera specs, and lighting. And as I mentioned, you can capture these URLs, but I'm happy to share these as well for our capture guide, and then our Intel article that we published a few years ago now maybe, specifically outlining different types of capture and the use cases. So I wanted to talk a little bit about 5G for transfer on this because I think it's actually interesting to think about, right? I mentioned massive amounts of data for volumetric video. And so 5G, of course, is super important in that because there are a lot of hurdles when you're dealing with that amount of data. Companies don't always have consistent internet. We've never dealt with that before, I'm sure. The use case here is actually St. Elmo's Soundstage. They recently changed their name, I believe, here in Austin, but ultimately they are in a warehouse district. And so their internet connection is not the most effective. One of the best ways to make sure that your volumetric video of its many terabytes of data is effective, useful, and you know, ideally outputs what you want it to, is to be able to test and calibrate your camera array. If you can't move the data around, that gets really challenging. You want to be able to test for lighting consistency, sheen, depth, segmentation, and time consistency among the many cameras because they all have to actually sync up with timing. This gets tricky when you don't have proper internet. So we're really excited about, obviously, the wider rollout of 5G because this helps enable that movement of data. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about a head-only rig. So I showed you this. This is the same one that was on the earlier slide, the little bust of Tim. This was done, like I said, with a 13 camera array that was webcams, off-the-shelf webcams. This larger one that you see in the background here with the dancer in the middle, that is the 104 camera array. And so we learned a lot with volumetrics about how to create the opportune capture, how to actually make the proper rig array, because you have to be able not only to take it with you, but to set it up effectively so that you actually get a great output. And what this really boils down to is, again, that fidelity of the human face. And so there's a lot of really cool ways to combine different technologies, including volumetric video and photogrammetry together, so that you can get like the best of all the worlds. And the head replacement, which I mentioned a little bit as well. You can see the millions of points on the face here. There are a ton of opportunities to track this. This is a very, very high quality capture array. It had 56 high-end DSLR cameras. The actor was very familiar with being captured in this way. And so it was really fun for us. We actually combined volumetric video and photogrammetry. So we had his body in photogrammetry, and we rigged it with the bones inside so that we could move in and animate it with motion capture. And then we added the volumetric head. And so it had that realism of the head, but the gross motor movement of the body parts that you get more effectively with photogrammetry and rigging. And again, more on the optimization of the heads. We really have worked tirelessly, my CTO, on creating opportunity to make these 3D models more functional, right? If your data size is so big and your triangles your polygon count is so massive, like this middle picture on the left, you're not going to get it to run effectively on anything. You have to have a machine with a lot of horsepower. In order to make it run effectively and look as high quality as you can, you really have to be cleaning and optimizing these to the ultimate level. And so on the right, you can see with some temporal coherence and some temporal illusion, we actually recreated some missing data, and we were able to have this mesh stay consistent over time. So it wasn't recreating every single frame and bringing up your data count. So there's a lot of really cool, fun stuff in that world. I wanted to briefly mention that we work with a ton of partners in the ecosystem, because the 3D ecosystem is massive. And this is obviously like a very, very small sort of view into it. This is folks that we have existing partnerships or are working with at this juncture. But it really boils down to 3 things. You have to have these creative software programs like Autodesk and Adobe, right? They are already the winners in this market. The people that are doing 3D creation are relying every day on these types of software programs to make their assets. And then they're processing them, of course, on their Intel chips, on their NVIDIA, things. And then like ultimately, a lot of this is going cloud as well. So AWS and IBM. And what that really means is, again, you have to create the way for all of these things to work together. And then lastly, there is the playback and consumption side, right? So whether it's hardware from Vive, whether it's an engine, Unity or Unreal, or whether it is the cameras that you're using to actually capture these things, you have to have a way to consume and digitize these assets. And so it's really important to look at that greater ecosystem in a way that brings it sort of full circle. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Mod and what we actually do at Mod. Mod is an AI-powered workflow solution to automate 3D work to be more productive. We look at the 3D ecosystem in 3 parts. So there's photos, there's process, and then there's playback. You have to have all 3, or you're really not doing anything with your 3D assets. And again, you can capture from a mobile phone, you can capture from a webcam, a scanning device, DSLR. We are not actually specific to any input type other than imagery and meshes at this juncture. Processing itself, we have 43 microservices on our platform at this juncture that cover the entire 3D workflow. So we intake the images, we clean up the original data, so degrain, denoise, deblur, and then we put it into 3D mesh creation, and then it goes into optimization. And optimization is really important because in order to play it back on VR or on your TV screen or on your mobile phone, those are all different optimization levels. And we have automated optimization that you can do to create assets for any playback. We also added in an NFT minting function in our platform recently with our partner Palm.io. They do the minting function. We're the 3D engine. They are the DeFi side. And with that, you know, Mod makes 3D easy in these ways. So we're a no-code solution. You don't have to understand how 3D works in order to use us. It's an upload. You select a template for where you're going to play it back, and then you download your asset. We have interoperable 3D. We have a lot of machine learning algorithms in our pipeline that we have trained with our own proprietary data. We actually have 170 terabytes of proprietary data. And so with this, one of the algorithms that we are training right now, it is continuing to train right now, where there are 3 fundamental things that it's going to change with photorealism. So number one, the file types are going to be 99% smaller. So they're going to be a 0.5 megabyte to 1.5 meg versus, you know, massive 3D files, right? So that is going to make it easy to transfer, easy to store a blockchain, easy to actually, you know, really make it functional. The other piece is that it's going to allow you to capture things that have been typically uncapturable with photorealism. So shine, sheen, reflective, refractive, thin objects are not typically the best. And that's why you see glassware, plates, jewelry, those kinds of things typically get modeled from scratch by an artist because they can't be captured very well in 3D photos. And so the other piece is that it actually allows for these things to become vector for 3D, meaning they will be that tiny file size, and then they'll have a cosine algorithm that actually allows it to balloon to the highest fidelity possible on any platform. So you can take it to Sandbox, Roblox, and Fortnite, and it will work effectively on any of those. That is a huge, massive improvement in the industry. We're working now to just do hardware tuning in order to make that more commercializable. But we are super fast. Typically, it takes days of work down to minutes of work for any given team. And we're all cloud-based. We actually run our own private cloud at this juncture, but we also have partnerships with cloud providers because we know that everyone has their own sort of architecture and infrastructure play that they're already doing. And we want to work with them to enable whichever they need. And then lastly, we are mobile, web, and API, right? So you can take photos. We do have a mobile app. If anyone wants to try their hand at 3D, you're welcome to download it. It is free. It's on Android and iOS. It's the Mod 3D scanner. You can also take photos with DSLR or what have you. User portals include the mobile, the web, and the API. And then you do the automated processing and view it and playback. And just a brief look at the app and sort of what it does. And the reason we created this was to actually teach people how to do photogrammetry, because it is that combination of photos and math. You have to kind of understand the intrinsics of where you need to take the photos. So it's augmented reality. It guides the user to take the images. You can see in the fourth one over where the blue bubbles are, that actually is where you move your phone in to take the picture. And then once you've taken the picture in that spot, then the bubble goes away, which you can see in the next one. And once you finalize all the photos, then it uploads and automatically generates the 3D asset. And I am happy to take questions now. I know that was a lot of information. It was fun to talk about all the nuanced ways that 3D kind of affects our lives. And I know we have a lot of people in chat too. Yeah.
So for the volume metric, the one you showed, there's a dancer and we saw the cameras that are around, but they aren't on the same level. But I was thinking, if you need to capture the whole dancing scenes, do you have to do like a dome?
You don't have to do a dome. We actually did have, I think 2 or 3 cameras up above her. And then we had cameras at about head height. And so the stands themselves, we didn't have 108 stands. We had something like 40 some odd stands because there were 3 cameras on every stand. And so some of them we positioned low as kicker cameras. So they're the ones that go toward the feet. There's only a few of those There, you don't need to have like the highest fidelity feet, but it is important to have all those levels and to have it from multiple perspectives. So you're 100% correct. It may not have been shown as well in that photo.
Were people able to hear that question? You have to go to the...
No.
Oh,
Yeah, that's right. Because the speaker is over there.
I should have repeated it. Sorry.
It's all right.
Yeah, what was the question?
Okay. The next question. Yeah.
Anyone else have questions?
That last demo or whatever you showed, the last slide, you went over pretty fast and it's kind of interesting. Can you re-explain that again, please? For us that are not 3D experts.
Which slide?
The very last one that you have. Yeah, that one.
This one. Okay, let me share my screen again so that everyone on the call can see it too. I popped out of Zoom. Share screen. Okay. Yes, so this is our mobile app. And what it does is it guides the user to take, I'm like having, it does. So it uses augmented reality. So the first screen, you actually move your phone around and with your camera, it tracks the surface that you're going to capture. So that's why you see the little dots around it. The second screen is you're sizing and moving the 3D dome. I chose a dome for this one over top of whatever you're capturing. So you can resize it. You can see the scale on the side. That's actually the smallest that it goes. And the thing that's in there is maybe like, I don't know, 4 inches tall and 4 inches wide, something like that. It was like a little square succulent. And so once you choose the shape, which is the dome, then it lays the dome out.
Share screen.
Oh, I'm not sharing it. I think I am. Is it not sharing?
I see you own it.
Oh, I thought I pressed share screen. Sorry. Thank you. Let's try that again.
Okay.
Okay. So you're sizing and moving the bubble, and one of the things in 3D, you're in 3D space. So you actually have to use that second screen to visualize around the object where the object is within that big bubble with the red box in it on the second screen. And that allows you to then choose what you're capturing. So if you're capturing something like a shoe that has a bottom, you would want to do the sphere so that you can get the entire top and bottom of it. In this case, I didn't need the bottom of the asset, and so I chose the dome, which is the second one. It then places the dome with all of the capture bubbles on top, which is the fourth screen. So all those capture bubbles are essentially where you need to line up your camera on your phone with. So the little red box in the middle of the asset, or the middle of your capture, the dome is here, and the bubbles are here. So you line up a camera and it takes the image in each of the spots. And so for the small one, it is about 145 photos. Once you are well practiced at it, it takes you like 2 to 3 minutes to do. It takes a little longer at first.
Just one camera.
One camera. Yep.
Multiple.
Yep.
Angles. Okay.
Phone camera. Yep, absolutely. And so a phone camera is not going to give you the highest fidelity, right? It's not the best camera. They're great. They're a lot better than they used to be. But if you're using this for high-end professional use case, you definitely want a better camera. So a DSLR, a point-and-click camera, is totally fine for that, and typically much higher quality. Depending, obviously there's a lot of specs around cameras, but anything above a cell phone would be higher quality. And then you can get into like purpose-built cameras. There are purpose-built cameras for volumetric capture and like a ton of other things. But so once it automates the upload, once you finish the images, it goes straight into our processing pipeline and it automatically hands you back of an asset that's ready for playback on mobile in a 360 view or in augmented reality projection.
So you have to physically take those pictures.
Yes.
That sounds not bad.
Well, one of the things that we're working on, the other thing that I actually failed to mention with the algorithm is that it will minimize the number of photos that you need. So because the machine learning is actually being trained to make better quality visuals and make them, faster, I'm like, come on, little computer, you could do it. Essentially, you'll be able to do it in 5 to 10 images, which obviously will be a game changer in, compared to 145 photos.
So this is an app. 'Cause I saw
Yes.
it.
So your business model is to do things for the client or train them to use of the product?
It is both. It's both. So we do have a managed services model in which we do capture, process, and cleanup for some clients. We also have a SaaS-based system where people can go in and subscribe to the processing, and then they do the capture themselves, upload it, and it processes and hands it back to
So
spec.
you do
Yeah.
your cloud service.
Yeah. And then we also do have licensing. So the licensing is definitely like at scale. And so companies like Epic Games, NBC Universal, when they're using it at scale, it makes sense for them to license it and use it as an internal tool. The reason that we built the app, because an app doesn't always translate to B2B, we're B2B. The reason we built the app is because we found it really challenging for people to understand the concept of a processing solution, right? It's kind of intangible. And so in order to show, what it is that we're doing, this is the light version, right? Because it is a mobile phone. It's not going to give you the highest quality. But ultimately it does immediately show someone, oh, if you just take photos, you put it through their pipeline, you get back a 3D asset. And so it helps us jump over hurdles in enterprise sales. It also is a product-led growth opportunity for us because we have a lot of organic user growth on the mobile side because it's a freemium app. And many of them are actually in the creator roles, they're art directors, they're project managers, and they're looking for tools and solutions for 3D. And this helps them learn about us and then understand that there's like a whole other world of higher level, more professional, services and product that I can access as well.
So you have this app on your phone.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the iOS and Android store.
So you can show us.
Yeah, totally.
So you mentioned that you have like gigabytes or terabytes of proprietary data. Is that what you license to potential customers, or what are those?
No, the terabytes of data that we have, it's 170 terabytes of data at this point. And so part of it came from early pilots that we did with very high-end production studios. So they already understood photogrammetry and volumetric video. We didn't have to train them on the capture of that piece. And so we were able to take their data sets, process their data sets, and then we use them to train our algorithms. So we actually don't sell them or license them. We're not a marketplace. That is something potentially later. At this point though, the second sort of chunk of it, so very high-end data for a large portion of it. And then the second portion, which is about 50 of that 50 terabytes of that data, is the low-end mobile captures. And so for all the mobile captures that we're getting in, we have more data that we can train the algorithm on to say, hey, this is bad, or this is not great, make it better, computer. And with this, we've also, with the training that we've done on this latest algorithm, we've been able to already show a massive amount of improvement on processing uncapturable things. Like we can process glitter, shine, sheen, reflective, refractive. If you think about the way that light hits glitter glass, it confuses the camera, right? Where is it supposed to be? But we're actually cutting that piece of the puzzle out because the machine learning understands how to actually separate the specularity. So it's really fascinating. And I see that we have a question about polar coordinates. To some extent, yes, we are talking about the X, Y, and Z axis because you do have to look around the object, right, and understand whether the bubble is like actually centered on the object. So you need to just literally visually look around it. No one necessarily has to understand X, Y, and Z axis at that point, especially for the augmented reality actually maps directly to the surface that you scanned. And so if you scanned a table or you scanned a floor, it's going to lay the surface on whichever one you scanned more of, or is like a focal point of your scan. And so they don't really need to understand that piece. I will say we've had some interesting ones come in where people try to capture on glass tables. A glass table is going to confuse the algorithm a lot. And so a lot of the dome was actually underneath the table because it didn't know that that was the surface. It tracked underneath it. And so at that point, that's kind of a lost cause. You can't capture in the middle of the table. You probably just need to research. So.
Question about the tools. So like normally there are multiple people working on one model. So I mean when we write code, we have like GitHub, like those things we can share, but like for the tools we have like something you can like have your own branch and
at this point, no. That is something that we are working on. So we do see ourselves as being a hub for 3D creation, right? And I mentioned that right with a little bit of the partnerships. So with the partnership side, in part, it's going to be plugins where people can directly access our tool from their Adobe interface or whatever they're using. In some cases, it's also going to likely be people accessing other tools from our pipeline. Right now, we have sort of an A to Z pipeline that we created that you just, it's not really custom per se at this point, other than you can choose your output and then the optimization changes. What we can do though, the entire thing was built in a modular fashion, meaning we can take pieces out and replace them with other pieces of software or other pieces of, goodness as we're going along and growing the opportunity. So for instance, in the 3D mesh creation part of our pipeline, we have a solution in there right now. We could replace that solution with something like Reality Capture, which is a mesh creation tool that Epic Games owns. We could replace it with Mesh, which is an open source mesh tool. There's a ton of different ways to do it. So we talked about actually doing a full open source pipeline because the reality is you're not going to get the extreme quality from an open source pipeline that you will from purpose-built tools that are subscription-based. But ultimately, it depends. We're working with Epic right now to actually create a custom pipeline for them using their tools. And so the underlying sort of goal of Mod is to be a workflow tool and help you create. Right now, we don't have the ability to let users make their own workflows, but in the future, I can definitely see that being a piece of puzzle. Does that make sense? Kind of.
I'm not exactly sure how to word this question, and I'm looking at the way cell phone computer industry is evolving, and Apple has now Apple Silicon, and I noticed you didn't have much Apple stuff, and they're going to have their own environment, and then there's going to be like a Windows environment or a Google environment, and I see them being kind of siloed right now for proprietary software and for them to figure out how they're going to make their money doing this. Do you have any thoughts on how that's going to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, Apple in particular does have a photogrammetry solution. You can on any iDevice, they actually are using the LiDAR for most of their 3D use cases. The LiDAR is not very accurate, and consumer LiDAR is not very high quality, unfortunately. And so it's limiting if you're using it for a professional use case. That being said, they are completely siloed right now. And I mentioned this briefly, but the DMA, which is the Digital Media Act, that got passed in Europe, I think is a game changer for the siloed problem that we're having. They are actually requiring that the gatekeeper companies, so your Google, your Meta, your Apple, actually have open ecosystems. So you can buy something in Google and play it in Apple. That in and of itself is going to start, and it's literally geared at American big tech companies, which I think is funny. I think that's going to start opening up and equaling out the playing field in regard to those things.
My personal belief is that, 2024, you won't buy an iPhone. You won't be able to buy an iPhone. You'll rent an iPhone owned by Apple, and they will determine what my speculation.
Interesting. I hope that's not true.
Because of the Epic Games lawsuit that went on, they're already saying that more people buy these on time. But this has got away from Apple, and I think that it's to their benefit to basically just lease you the phone and say you can buy, but you don't own the phone.
I mean, honestly, that wouldn't surprise me because the hardware world is really challenging right now, especially with logistics and resources and all the things that are happening there. The other thing is with the DMA passing for Europe, they're getting kind of pushed out of being able to have that walled garden in the software world. And so I could absolutely see them doing that with hardware.
Yeah.
That would make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, because there's a lot of subtle signs that they're moving in that direction. Then what is Epic Games going to do? They own the hardware; they can choose what you're allowed to put on. Right?
That's very true. We look at it. We're agnostic. We haven't picked sides with anyone. Apple, the only reason that we haven't done a ton with them is that it is a very enclosed ecosystem. We haven't had the right opportunity. Technically, we're competitive with them with their photogrammetry solution, although their photogrammetry solution doesn't have optimization and post processing. They have the capture, they have the 3Dification, and that's it. They hand you back whatever they made. And it's decent, like in some cases. But again, not great for professional use case. And no one professionally is going to want to use that at scale because one camera isn't going to solve your problem.
Right.
And so we don't look at ourselves as a mobile app solution. That's a part of our ecosystem, but it really is only a part because it solves some of those, hoops that I mentioned, like the enterprise sales level.
The issue comes to how the people use it.
Yeah.
At the beginning of your presentation, you talked about how they're agnostic with how the person uses it, whether it's a VR headset or their phone, and a lot of people use their phones. So,
absolutely.
They're going to have a solution for their phone.
Yeah, I mean, I see number one, I see us being highly acquirable because we are actually complementary to a lot of the players out there in the world. We actually don't feel like we're directly competitive with any of the other. Everybody thinks they don't have competitors, right? I know we have competitors, but the reality is there are not a lot of people working on workflow solutions. And that's what we are. We are the piece that brings everything together. And so with that, I think we're complementary to a lot of the companies, even those that could be considered our competitors. And I mean, it's
my solution, my suggestion, observation is that you just take that into your thinking. That 2 years from now, this is what the landscape is going to be. And you're already starting to see the little subtle things. We'll know a whole lot in 2 weeks.
Very true. Very true. No, I like that. I appreciate that. That's a very good, interesting perspective. Thank you. No other questions?